Good afternoon. All right. Glad again to see this number here. I see a couple that weren't here this morning, so my lesson this afternoon is part 2 of part 1 from this morning. So those of you that missed the morning worship, this part 1 of the art of listening. This morning we begin talking about the importance of listening. We talked about the differences between hearing and listening. We looked at 3 levels of listening and 3 kinds of listeners from the Bible. We looked at some of the benefits of learning the art of listening. Tonight, I will be focusing on how to become a better listener. If you will put into practice some of the things that I will be pointing out, you can become a better listener. I'll start with a few Bible verses. The first one comes from James chapter 1 and verse 19. James 1 and 19. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Proverbs 18 and 13. 18 and 13. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. And Proverbs 10 and 19. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. There are many more verses that could be used to teach the same idea, but these are enough to show us that listening carefully and speaking less, and we're speaking less and more apt to hear and keep and stop things from rattling around in your head, and it will always serve us well, and by keeping anger and other sins at bay. The art of listening takes effort and many things that can get in the way, but there are things we can do to overcome the obstacles before us and establish new listening habits. Sharpening our listening skills is pretty easy to do when we learn what good listening is and what is not. We must never forget that listening is not a passive process. So all the techniques I am about to share with you are active, including the ones that are not visible to the speaker. First of all, listening must be done with an open mind. Be ready to hear and consider all sides of the issue. This does not mean that we have to agree with what is being said, but we must avoid going into what I call a defensive mode, which means you stop listening to the rest of the story and you begin thinking about how you are going to respond to that one point you disagree with. When we don't make ourselves listen to the whole story, we tend to jump to conclusions, and we miss out on something important. I have heard some preachers start out preaching something false, and they do it to get the attention of their hearers. Then they finally let the people in on what they are doing by saying something like, this is what Satan would have me to teach. But now let us look at what the Bible says on this matter. How many times have you started reading a book and the first chapter was boring, so you decided not to read the rest? Then later you find a friend that read the same book and talked about how great it was once you got past the first chapter. So the point of the matter of listening to the whole story is that you have the complete picture. You may find yourself learning something from a new perspective, or if you disagree, you will have more information to go on in order to show what the person is saying is not right. In other words, be like the Bereans in Acts 17. Second, listen to the entire message without judging or refuting. Building upon one point, we must learn to suppress the urge to let bias and prejudice prevent us from fully listening. When we can only do one thing at a time effectively, listen, judge, or respond, this is a great order to follow. You have to begin with listening to the entire message. And when you can weigh your thoughts against what has been said and finally respond, when you are the listener, you cannot simultaneously be the judge because our minds do not work well that way. However, when we make the effort to suppress our desire to make premature judgments, we become better listeners. A great way to prepare for this in advance is to be aware of what your biases are and then try to reason out why you feel this way. What buzzwords or topics generate strong emotional reactions, either positive or negative in you. If you judge and then speak too soon, you'll open yourself to the possibility of having missed a critical part of the message and thus embarrassing yourself by jumping to conclusions. An extreme example of what not to do would be how the Jews already had their minds made up about Stephen in Acts 7. He tried to teach them the truth, but they would not listen, and they killed him. Number 3, determine the concept and central ideas of the message. The best gauge to know whether you are listening or just hearing is whether or not you are actively looking for the central idea or ideas of what is being said. If the message is well constructed, then our role as a listener will be easier, but we will not always have that luxury. A great technique, regardless of the speaker's ability to construct a message, is to listen in such a way that you can minimize what you believe are the central ideas. If the situation allows it, share your summary with the speaker and confirm your understanding. Doing this builds your confidence as a listener. Plus, it proves to the speaker that you were listening. This technique can be very helpful when resolving problems between the parent and the child and the husband and the wife. Sometimes we think we understand what our family member is saying, but we may be wrong. Instead of assuming, which will almost always get you into trouble, restate your family member restate to your family member what you think they were trying to say, and then you will know for sure if you understood it correctly. Number 4, learn to adapt to the speaker's appearance, personality, and delivery. The Lord said it best in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. In context, Samuel was looking for the biggest and strongest man as being the next king, because we have that tendency to look at the outer appearance of a person. Imagine being approached by a man like John the Baptist. Matthew 3 and 4 describes him, and John himself was clothed in camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. You might think, who is that crazy looking man? Despite his looks, he was the forerunner for Christ, and his message was important. Sometimes race or certain accents can cause us to view people differently. But as Christians, we must learn to overcome stereotypes and not allow them to interfere with our listening skills. Abraham Lincoln was not a handsome man, but as the 16th president of the United States, his words changed the course of history.